There's a rule of thumb that it takes 21 days to form a habit. In 2009, the European Journal of Social Psychology reported a study that had been done on how long it actually takes to form a habit. And believe it or not, they concluded that it takes between 18 and 254 days to form a habit. That's an average of 66 days to become automatic. The days vary according to how much pleasure we receive from either discontinuing or continuing an action, a habit. For instance, giving up Bluebell, pecan pralines, and cream is more difficult than giving up spinach. Adding 100 sit-ups to your daily routine is more difficult than hitting the snooze on your alarm for another hour of sleep. Actions with rewards are easier to develop. If the habit you're trying to give up doesn't have much pleasure related to it, then it's easier to give it up. If the habit you're trying to gain has some pleasure attached to it, then you develop that habit more easily. But it takes between 18 and 254 days for a habit to become automatic. Our brains like habits because they're efficient. When you get into your car, you automatically put on a seatbelt. You don't think about doing it or why you do it. When you automate common activities, you free up mental resources for other tasks. God's Word tells us that gathering as a church family in person is a habit, a very beneficial spiritual habit. Reading from Hebrews chapter 10 and beginning with verse 24. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. Gathering as a community of faith is indeed a habit. Habits are formed between 18 and 254 days. Habits are broken in the same amount of time. The pandemic, the COVID pandemic, has now extended well over 365 days. More than enough time to develop a bad habit of not gathering as a community of faith. Some will think that this message today is insensitive, and others will think it is long overdue. Regardless, not physically gathering with the church hurts you spiritually. During the COVID-19 pandemic in America, over 2/3 of the followers of Jesus Christ have not physically gathered with the church. Not physically gathering with the church hurts you spiritually. We now appear to be emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic and have entered another health pandemic, a spiritual health pandemic. The spiritual health pandemic will linger unless we take bold steps to re-engage with one another. I don't know the laws or the rules that you're under or what health risks remain for you personally. There is space for differing circumstances and consciences. If the flu keeps you home from work, you stay home and should not feel guilty. At the same time, you know that staying home from work over time hurts your job. So you get back to work as soon as you can. As you think through your own church attendance situation, maybe you remain providentially hindered from attending. The Lord shows mercy and grace. He makes provision for the stranded and for the soldier and for the shut-in and for the high-risk senior saint. As you weigh all of these variables in your physical worship, leave a pebble in your shoe. If you can't attend, I want you to be frustrated that you can't, so that you'll not become comfortable away from the people of God. If you're not frustrated, something is wrong. The Lord has commanded us not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. Hebrews 10:25. Not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Absence from the gathering does affect our spiritual state. Even if we have a legitimate reason for not attending, being sick or quarantined, Jesus designed Christianity and the progress of our discipleship to center around gatherings. The truth is, therefore, very simple. Gathering with the church is spiritually good for you. Not physically gathering with the church spiritually hurts you. There's growing concern among church leaders that some believers and some churches will not emerge from the COVID-19 quarantine very healthy. George Barna has predicted that 20% of the churches in America will remain permanently closed. The other 80% will reopen, but they'll struggle to resurrect these collapsed ministry infrastructures, the volunteers who've not been in place for over a year. Prior to the COVID quarantine, the average faithful church member was attending twice a month. Now there are concerns that after 1 year of not gathering with the people of God, that the average faithful church member will attend less than 1 time per month. It's a growing reality that members are not attending when they probably could be attending now. People have become too comfortable with the virtual option. Televised live streaming, Facebook media are much less healthy substitutes. Our virtual options are tempting followers of Jesus to think, hey, I seem to be doing okay spiritually just by tuning in every week. Maybe not going to church on Sunday is not such a big deal. After all, I don't even have to get out of my pajamas, and I don't have to get the kids ready. Even older adults that don't have children, we hear them in our neighborhood who've been very faithful in their churches for years are saying, we've gotten really comfortable with just staying at home on Sundays. Virtual church individualizes Christian discipleship. It subtly replaces a family faith for a consumer faith. Some of our church members will keep choosing the virtual option if it's available, even though they should not. Not gathering is not spiritually healthy. It is a spiritual health pandemic. Some argue that the virtual option is a big evangelistic outreach. Non-Christians seem more likely to tune in than to turn up. Yet God's holy word tells us that non-Christians need not just a picture of someone preaching. They need to be surrounded by Christians worshiping. 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and beginning with verse 24. But if all of you are prophesying and unbelievers, or people who don't understand the things of God, come into your meeting, they will be convicted of sin and judged by what you say. As they listen, their secret thoughts will be exposed, and they will fall to their knees and worship God, declaring, God is truly here among you. That's the word of God. Virtual church individualizes not just discipleship, but evangelism. It shows the world a picture of Christianity through words and not through words and lives. Maybe that is why Christianity grew for 2,000 years without our virtual services. The Bible's command to gather is not burdensome. 1 John 5:3. Loving God means keeping His commandments, and His commandments are not burdensome. Do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together, as some are in the habit of doing. That is a command of God. COVID-19 was designated as a worldwide pandemic on March 11, 2020. American public life came to a halt. Restaurants, your hair salons, churches, schools, even some medical clinics stopped receiving their patients on a regular basis. They all stopped gathering. And today's sermon is being delivered on March 21, 2021. Now that's 385 days. 385 days. Do you remember the research on how long it takes to form a habit? Anywhere between 18 and 254 days. We're at 385 days of social distancing, and it's more than enough time to form a strong habit of not gathering with the people of God. It will take determination and a deep desire to be found faithful to develop a habit of gathering with the people of God. Not physically gathering with the church hurts you spiritually. The Surgeon General stated that we are in a loneliness epidemic in America. Loneliness epidemic in America. And the Surgeon General spoke that in 2017, 4 years ago. Can you imagine the psychological impact of the last 12 months of isolation and where the loneliness factor is in our country today? How will 12 months of wearing masks and withdrawing from physical touch impact our children's social skills? If 70 to 93% of our interpersonal communication is through nonverbal cues, things other than the words we speak, what have we failed to understand about one another for 385 days? And more importantly, what immediate steps do we need to take to reintegrate our children socially? One big downside of the social isolation is that people feel like others no longer care for them. This is a common complaint among church members. The emotion of love dwindles. I'm not referring to the theological word for love, agape. Agape is a self-sacrificing concern. Agape love is a commitment regardless of the response that other people give. It's not based on the emotion that comes from it. Agape is a commitment to have self-sacrificing concern for another. But when you talk about the emotion of love is momentary. The emotion of love is brief, but fortunately it is frequently recurring. It will come back. Dr. Barbara Fredrickson has done extensive research on the emotion of love and released a book in 2013 entitled Love 2.0. I've appreciated the research in this book because often you'll hear couples, one member of a married couple will say, I love him, but I'm not in love with him anymore. Well, that's a measurement of your emotion of love. And the emotion of love is brief, and it can come and it can go. It's fluid, and it needs constant nurturing in order to maintain that emotion of love that's there. She presented her research in 2013. Most isolated church members lament that they don't feel cared for nor connected. To experience the emotion of love, you need, according to Fredrickson, 3 tightly interwoven events. The first is shared positive emotions. The second is a syncing up of your biological and behavioral actions. Eye contact is a great example of that. Eye contact is the main mode of sensory connection. And smiles. Humans use as many as 50 different smiles to indicate emotions that they're feeling. The key to love, Fredrickson says, is to add some form of physical connection. So in order to maintain the emotion of love, that I feel loved. I've got to have one, shared positive emotion. 2, I've got to sync up my behavioral actions. And 3, she says there has to be opportunities for mutual care. Mutual means it's reciprocal, it's back and forth. And without these 3 tightly interwoven events, the emotion of love fades. This explains why so many isolated church members are reporting that they feel disconnected, that no one cares about me. I don't feel loved. Well, of course not. If the emotion of love is momentary and it's kindled by sharing positive emotions with others and eye contact and smiles and mutual back and forth caring, then of course we no longer feel the emotion of love. And the question is, can the emotion of love return? And the overwhelming answer is yes. We must gather to share positive emotions with one another. We must sync up our biological and behavioral chemistry, and we must experience mutual care in order to feel the emotion of love. Virtual church is a junk food substitute for authentic Christian community. Gathering with the church is spiritually good for you. Not physically gathering with the church spiritually hurts you. Follow the science has been a frequent refrain during the pandemic. Aren't we grateful for the advances of science over the last century? Remarkable improvements in living conditions, clean water, and medical procedures. Yet science is a work in process, and it's susceptible to human fallibility. Using leeches to bleed off disease was following the science in the 1700s, but today is considered barbaric. Open heart surgery was considered a medical miracle and now is a procedure of last resort. The scriptures are infallible. The scriptures are inspired by the infallible Spirit of God. For 20 centuries, the unchanging truth that followers of Jesus Christ know to obey, regardless of famine, persecution, or disease, is that God's commands are not burdensome, and loving God means keeping His commands. Do not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing.